I don't want to do that yet. It's not. We're gonna have to do it. Interesting. I've been going all the.
All right, you guys ready? Let's get started.
Yeah, that's good.
It's snowy out and we all want to get home before it gets worse, right? The staff is
Ready, Eddie?
Staff might not have the same perspective if they have to work all day. But time being 10 a.m. on January 25th, 2023, I'd like to call this meeting to order of Kane County's American Rescue Plan Committee. Clerk, please call the roll.
Kenyon,
Here.
Bates,
Bates here.
Gums,
Comes here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Molina, Strathman,
Stradlin here.
Sturgis, Tepe, and Sanchez.
Sanchez present.
Pirog is here.
Approval of minutes. If I could get someone to motion for unanimous consent to
I would
approve the
move
minutes,
un-
December 21st, 2022. Mr.
unanimous
Kenyon
motion.
asked for unanimous consent. Any objections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Public comment, agenda, non-agenda items. Do we have anyone online who wants to deliver public comment at this time? I don't see anyone I don't recognize, so we will move on. Discussion items, program manager update, Mr. Phillips.
Good morning. I'm Peter Phillips, American Rescue Plan Program Manager. I have just a couple of bullets of information to share with you. We're in the meat of preparation for the fourth quarter 2022 Treasury reporting. Ernst and Young and I were working in the portal last evening and for several hours, and we should have a review available for the Executive Director of Finance today. And then we anticipate certifying the fourth quarter ARP report no later than Monday. Also, we completed the FEMA public assistance filing for reimbursement for the mass vac site expenses. We filed just a little over $1.2 million request for reimbursement. Treasury has, or FEMA rather, has since followed up with a request for information on 9 items, which there were 248 items submitted, so that's not bad. And the information is standard. They're looking for some further detail on some of the expenses and some boarding documentation, specifically on some credit card expenses for the site. And then and we are progressing with the community support program. Actually, today is every 2 weeks, we have a separate ARP AP cycle than the standard county cycle for AP. So we will be submitting our disbursement packets for this next AP cycle today. And that is my update for today.
Any questions for Mr. Phillips? He'll be walking us through the risk assessment process later in the agenda. So we'll come back to him in a little bit. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Bates, go ahead.
so who are we dispersing to? Is that in the packet? I
It
don't
is
think
not in the agenda packet, but
Yeah.
we can have that sent out to the committee.
Certainly, it
Yeah.
is the current disbursement statistics data is in the ARP SharePoint site. That link that that I've distributed it via email is a open live link. So as those folders are updated weekly, the information is available via that link in the email, but I can certainly send that link again.
Okay, good. Yeah, I
okay.
read the packet, so I should know it's not there, but I'd be interested. Thank you.
I'll send the link today.
Mr. Chairman, Strathman here.
Strathman, go ahead.
Yes, I just am curious if Mr. Phillips can tell us with the FEMA reimbursement, is Batavia, is that part of the reimbursement? I mean, Batavia was so generous with us donating the space and the utilities to us. Is that something that Batavia has to apply for, or is that part of our part of the FEMA payback?
That is a good question. It is not part of the FEMA payback. Public Health Finance has worked with Batavia directly. So I could get an update from them. Madam Chair probably has it.
Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Batavia will be seeking its own reimbursement. It's
Okay,
separate
thank
from.
you. They were just so generous. I just,
I'm
happy that they were so generous, and I just wanted to make sure that they were getting some reimbursement as well.
Indeed, they are.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Tepe,
in the packet that.
I think your microphone is turned off. There we go.
I'm back. In the packet, Mr. Phillips is gonna send to us, are you gonna send to us the status of every request? Because it's not in the packet now and we don't have anything to approve in the meeting today. So where do we stand with all of the requests that are going on?
The department request or the community support grant?
All of them?
So we're going to speak to that here during this meeting today.
Okay, then I'll wait my question.
Mr. Tepe, there is a Thursday standing call in which we get the updates for the week on where we're at. So once we get those tomorrow, we'll have those sent out to the committee. So you can
That's why I
see.
was asking, does that
Yeah.
include that, which is what he said earlier, does that include all of those?
The
all that you
reports that
know
we have one separate for community support grants and another for the department requests, department projects. So both of those will get sent out this week after we have them. Does that make sense?
Well, just like specifically, I know there's been a request from Northern Illinois Food Bank. Is that on the list?
Oh, another request? No, that's not on that current list. We're not at the point yet where we're assessing that project yet. That's.
And I know there's a
the-
internal request associated with updating all of the courtrooms to the proper equipment
Mhm,
in order to
mhm.
do that. Is that on that list?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so those are the kinds of things I'd like, yes.
Mhm. With the forthcoming agendas, we can include, I suppose, the most recent version of those documents that we have. So it won't be current to the day that we're in committee, but it at least be a recent update. If
I
that,
understand, but all of us, I know, would like to see these things move along as expeditiously as possible. So,
we're on the same page.
you know,
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Question, I'm thinking timeline. So some of these projects may take a bit of time to be completed for external and internal applicants. If we're moving at a pace, which I'm sure you're moving as quickly as you are able to, but if these applicants are not approved until potentially the fall of this year, money is being dispersed towards the end of this year, and they have to be in compliance. So that'll bring us into 4/24, and they have to be project completed sometime in 25. Is that accurate? And spill over, I think, a little bit to 26.
The end of 26.
Will they have enough time to complete those projects? And the need that is apparent now, I mean, I think Mr. Tepe and I can speak for about an hour and plus about the need for our food pantries to receive money immediately. Our homeless population receive money immediately. It's winter and eggs are selling at $5. And food pantries cannot supply eggs because they're simply, they can't afford it anymore. So how soon can we move this forward? Because there are critical needs that are out there, and I understand process and procedure. We all own that. It's very important. But there are some significant issues that we've got to move out faster.
So I think we're sort of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because we will be discussing this topic in general under resource needs. Because that is a critical issue that we're facing right now. And we've been very cautious in our expenditures with this program. But that results in a different kind of timeline than we may desire. So we're going to have that conversation later in the agenda. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Phillips? Okay. All right. So the next section, along the lines of what was just being discussed, I wanted to bring to you an update on where we're at with our department projects. I know it's something that we started working on last year, and we got busy administering a lot of other things with this program, not the least of which some of the FEMA activities and reporting and just a lot of community support grant work, which is starting to wind down now, thankfully. So we're gearing ourselves up to really accomplish the initiation and execution of these projects as quickly as we can. But I want you to at least get a sense of what has been happening in the meantime while we have been sort of waiting. We have a few open projects that we started that have come before this committee and the county board. So I wanted to at least get an update from some of those department heads and team leads about where they're at in the process, what some of the bottlenecks are that they've encountered, internal and external, and just let you know what's going to be coming up, because right now it does seem kind of quiet. Nothing's happening, but all of a sudden it's going to seem like, it's going to go from famine to flood pretty quickly, I think. So it's going to be a wild ride, a lot of things going on. There potentially could be up to 40 to 50 department projects happening at one time, which require the execution and monitoring, ongoing monitoring to make sure that we stay on target. So don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. Let's bring up our first guest, Mr. Mark Van Kerkhoff, to give us an update on his development projects. Mr. Van Kerkhoff. All right.
Just have to get very close.
Okay, is this on?
Yeah, that one's sort of sensitive, or not sensitive, rather. You have to really get on it. So
Thank you. Mark Van Kerkhoff, Director of Development and Community Services. Thank you for this opportunity this morning. And in general, I want to thank the ARPA committee and the county board for last year in April approving set aside amount for the department projects. No, we all appreciate the opportunity to evaluate what ARPA was designed to do, and you allowed us the opportunity to dream a little bit and look at what we're already doing and seeing what we can do to make things even better. So with that, got an update for you on our 5 projects. Our department looked at the opportunity under the umbrella of economic recovery and sustainability. And we did so in 5 areas and did 5 separate applications under those themes. One is for the Fabulous Fox Water Trail. The other initiative that was already underway, also the countywide economic development, agriculture, which is our #1 economic driver, manufacturing, and tourism. We had a couple of goals for the economic recovery and sustainability. One, we looked at our external applications is the way we like to look at them. The funding that we're asking for is really going to go out to benefit the community and the businesses in these areas. So while it's an internal department applications, the funding is going to go out and benefit those economic sectors. The other thing we looked at was emphasizing how do we turbocharge existing programs activities, things that we're already doing. We heard loud and clear from the committee to keep applying for other grants, not just to say, well, we're just going to use ARPA funds for these things, but to keep looking for other sources of funding. And the other area to look at economic recovery areas not being addressed by our municipalities. And all of our 5 applications fall into those categories. No one else is looking after our agricultural economy, manufacturing, countywide tourism, and economic development. Our process of working with the ARPA team, Peter Phillips, our state's attorney's team, and EY has been to complete risk assessments for each application and project. And they've been very, very helpful in developing that risk assessment and helping lead us through how to get them the information that supports it. It's been a fantastic dialogue of learning both ways. We've also been looking for similar programs in other counties and states that are using ARPA funds. In other words, a kind of safe haven territories to help guide us in what we want to do. We're been encouraged and have a history anyway of working with established credible partners as subrecipients. And then I want to especially note the ARPA team has been especially flexible in accommodating grant deadlines. You'll see in these individual updates that along the way, we've had opportunities to apply for state and federal funds. And that's sometimes mixed up our priorities, and sometimes grant deadlines are within 30 to 60 days, and they've responded very quickly to help confirm that their applications would be eligible and work with the ARPA programs. So with that, these are the 5 applications we had submitted with the funding amounts that had been approved back in April. I'm going to go through these one at a time, so I'm going to jump ahead. The first and most active one that you've already seen as a county board last year, the Fabulous Fox Water Trail Promotion and Infrastructure Fund. You've seen presentations on this in a couple of different committees, so I won't park on this, but basically of the Fabulous Fox Water Trail, we are in the economic sweet spot for tourism and ability to make the river accessible to our over 500,000 people and millions of people in the region. So last year, in the summer, we launched and completed a strategic marketing plan. We began the risk assessment with the ARPA team. In September, the county board authorized ARPA funds so that we could submit an application for $500,000 to the Illinois DCEO Tourism Attraction Grant. That was an example of hurry up to get something so we could go in with that application saying that the county board had committed funds for infrastructure. We've also submitted an application to the National Park Service for designation as a National Water Trail. In December, we submitted an additional application for marketing. That's a reimbursement that would help supercharge our marketing program. And in 2023, we're going to be putting up launch site signs. You can see an example of them to the right. And then depending on the grant awards that we've applied for, we'll be working to hire a consultant and begin selecting locations for new and expanded launch sites. The second one, economic development strategy and organization
Wait,
for
Mark?
King County. Yes,
Did you receive those other grants?
they're still pending. We have not heard. We hope to hear soon. This one back in May, we submitted an application for 150,000 for an economic development planning grant. We began working on the risk assessment, both for our own countywide efforts as well as the regional effort that was just launched for the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership. September, the county, we were awarded that grant. We got news of that, $150,000 for the RISE grant. In November, the county board passed a resolution supporting the regional effort for up to $300,000 up to 3 years. January was the official launch of the regional partnership. And for 2023, we'll be retaining a consultant for the countywide economic development strategy using the DCO grant, and then use those recommendations and ARPA funds to launch an economic development organization for Kane County. The third one is the agricultural for agriculture. And this, our team has always been very active in applying for outside grants. In fact, over the last 8 years, they've brought in about $1 million in outside grants. So this is a team that's used to applying for funds. They kept on doing that in the last couple of years. You see a summary of some of the ones that we got from $1,000 to almost $300,000 from the USDA. In the spring of last year, we partnered with the Illinois Farmers Market Association to do mini grants. It was kind of a pilot program. We provided a match to funding that they received. It was very well received. So in December, we began our risk assessment process with the ARPA team. And we're looking at 4 projects. One is to expand that successful mini grant program, calling that Harvest to Table. The second one would be to supplement grants for our livestock assessment. We just put out an RFP for that, received that back, and it exceeds the amount of the grant funds that we received. So we're going to be looking to supercharge that at livestock assessment. Third being an on-farm infrastructure grant and a working farms fund. These would be partnering with the Conservation Fund, which is a national organization in conservation. What part would be for paying for infrastructure, and the other is they have a working farms fund, which is active in the Chicago region and Atlanta region. And they purchase at-risk farms and then lease it back to local food growers who are just getting started or expanding. And then eventually the farmer buys that property back and puts a permanent easement over it. So it accomplishes a number of things that are really exciting. And then also the Conservation Fund will match the county's dollars, dollar for dollar. So those will be very much like our farmland protection program, where every dollar we spent gets doubled. The fourth one, the manufacturing fund. In 2022, we researched how other counties were supporting manufacturers. One good program that was launched last year is in McHenry County, partnering with IMAC, which is a statewide partner that we've done cooperative grant programs with before. So we're working to do that with them. And then the fifth project at Kane County for tourism. We've been, again, researching how other counties are using ARPA funds for tourism, especially when they have multiple convention visitors bureaus. In Kane County, we have 2. Together, they serve most of Kane County, but not all, and they also serve other areas. So, but they are been very supportive of our efforts. So we'd be looking to work with them to provide funds that would help, 1, promote the Fabulous Fox Water Trail. 2, sports tourism has remained strong, and there's been facilities investment, not just our cross-country course, but Aurora University and others have really upped the facilities and things that are available for sports tourism. And then finally, agritourism. Again, no one else is looking out for our agritourist industry, and getting them involved in promotion, which is what they do best, is, I think, a solid approach. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but we greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Van Kerkhoff. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Van Kerkhoff, question for you with respect to the
sustainability funds that are allocated for these 5 different areas. They total a little over $10 million a year. Is that money all ARPA money, or is part of it ARPA money? I know we do have grants coming in and that would reduce it. But outside of the grants, where is the rest of that money coming from?
So these are all ARPA funds that we've applied for to use. So yes, they're all ARPA funds. I will note that with the 300,000 that's committed to supporting the regional effort, if our ARPA team, if they do their assessment on what the regional group is doing, we may need to pay for part of that out of our own Economic Development Fund 400, which is set aside for economic development. So we'll be continuing to make sure everything we do is ARPA eligible. That's what the team is for, and they've been very great in that. And if not, we'll continue to try to use our own economic development funds or apply for other grants.
Any other questions from Mr. Van Kerkhoff? Okay, some big stuff coming, and
Thank
it's
you.
good to see what's been happening.
Mr. Chair Gums.
Oh, Gums, go ahead.
Yeah, really quick question. So I recently had a conversation with a constituent, and as all of these requests pertain to the new infrastructure and jobs bill, it was posed to me, you know, how are you spending all this ARPA money when you're going to be getting a whole bunch from the infrastructure bill on issues such as this? And I really struggled with that response. I did have to do a little more digging. So as we go forward, my question would be, if we obtain more monies from the infrastructure bill, will that be reimbursed to our ARPA fund? I
I
hate to
can't
throw that
speak to
monkey
the
wrench in there, but
eligibility. But if we were to be reimbursed, similar to what Mr. Van Kerkhoff just laid out, seeking other grants and getting those funds, if it's not a dollar for dollar match, you know, it could be a replacement.
thank
Madam
you. I
Chair.
really did not have the answer to that question, so thank you.
I believe, just to respond, Ms. Gomes, the infrastructure money is a separate fund that would be coming in, primarily roads, bridges, other issues. And the ARPA funds are programmatic. So unless, for instance, dam removal may be, I'm using that very hypothetically, dam removal may be a infrastructure issue, which would be infrastructure money. And the Fox River Water Trail would then be able to do a history of what the dam was about, do some historical acknowledgement of dam use up and down the river, and then be able to develop an effective launch pad or fishing site for the fish now that can travel freely without being stopped by a dam. Does that help you out? There are different programs.
Yeah, I understand that in my response, Gums here. It was a very long conversation, and it kind of, you know, I'm always up to change my mind conversation girl. So it was confusing to me, the prospect of it was posed as forward thinking, right? If you're anticipating a lot of money and this person was well informed as to how we could utilize that infrastructure money, why are we spending it on these things when they didn't understand, you know, certain things, which I was able to answer, but that was simply a question from a constituent that I needed more, frankly, input on, so.
Yeah, if there's any crossover for eligibility, we'd be happy to take that money and use the ARPA money for something else, but we'll have to identify that first. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Bates?
so do we have Ernst & Young or somebody searching the bushes for other grants like the infrastructure bill at all times in case there is a crossover?
I don't know that our team specifically is searching at all times for that. I know that they have partners that they're the subject matter experts on that. And so we utilize those resources when we can. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Madam Chair.
And just reflecting back, the infrastructure bill, the money that has been allocated to the state of Illinois from the federal government for roads and bridges primarily are state-owned roads and bridges at this point, not locally owned. So they're putting the money towards that because that has the highest population use. So I'm not aware of any local money yet, and that would be something that transportation could address. I'm not aware of any of that money coming directly to Kane County for the county roads and the county bridges.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Surges.
Are you aware that there's a pecking order at all? Like, does it go state, then township, then county, then
I don't think townships. got
like
it.
who's next?
It goes state, And then as far as the other pecking order, I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Van Kerkhoff. Next up, we have Mr. Isaacson with the Department of Health. He is zooming in from out of state today. Mr. Isaacson, how are you doing?
Excellent. Good to see everybody today.
Good morning.
Yep. So he
Morning.
has an update on his ARPA project. Well, it's more of a program. There's multiple projects within it, as Mr. Van Kerkhoff says. So I'll let you take it over.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So today I'm going to be talking about two of the requests that the health department had submitted that are really focused on getting funds and activities, specifically programmatic interventions out into the community. The first being our behavioral health interventions, and the second being around chronic disease, with a specific focus on making sure that we're addressing health equity in that process. So next slide, please. So starting with the behavioral health, and I've talked to the board at length about this issue, and again, I just want to echo what Mr. Van Kerkhoff said. I'm very thankful for how receptive and proactive the board has been on all of these issues. Just quickly as a reminder, behavioral health, which includes mental health and substance use disorders, has been identified as the #1 priority in our most recent health assessment. We call that our 2021 community health assessment. That's something we do every 3 years. Most of that information was collected in 2020. And unfortunately, as we've discussed, the pandemic, the multiple years of pandemic that occurred after this process has just exacerbated all of these issues. I do like to point out one thing when we talk about this is what is the cost of behavioral health in our community? And I think it makes it a little bit tricky because we're looking at loss of human life, certainly, which is tricky to put a dollar amount to. Suffering for people who may be struggling with a mental health issue or struggling with a substance use issue, and then just the concentric rings of disruption and discomfort that's felt by family and friends and workplaces and schools around everybody who may be struggling. So we have the individuals who may be suffering and unfortunately potentially dying. We have those in the community around them who are suffering. Because these issues are the primary drivers of homelessness, hospitalizations, mental health hospitalizations have surpassed everything except for birth and delivery in our community. Certainly, mental health and substance use issues are the primary driver for many of the incarcerations that occur in our community. And then, as I mentioned, even looking at productivity in the workplace, many people are struggling with depression and anxiety, can't access the help that they need. And that's a drain on every business. I'm sure as you talk to people in the community, you hear from different business owners that mental health has continued to be a larger and larger issue. And then when we talk about school challenges, that just opens up a whole new issue that, again, especially with the pandemic, we're seeing more kids avoiding school. We're seeing more trouble in school, more acute disruptions in school because of kids. And again, I'm not pointing a finger at kids. There's biological reasons why people have mental health issues. And then certainly trauma that's being experienced by these young people is driving them. So typically a 5-year-old is not violent by themselves, but it's something that they're experiencing in their life, which is an indication of something in our society that we're not able to support them better. So key point on this slide is if we get better at addressing mental health and substance use, move upstream, that's going to save a lot of suffering in our community, and it's going to save a tremendous amount of money. Every emergency room visit is very expensive. And even if that person is fully insured, somebody's paying for that. So if we have Blue Cross and they're paying for a lot of people to go to the emergency department, the rest of us with Blue Cross are picking that up. So I'm not just talking about publicly funded things, but the cost of this, the cost of people being incarcerated, these are much more expensive interventions that are occurring because we're not quite able to manage this as well as we could be. Next slide, please. So for behavioral health over the last year, again, just a big thank you to the county board for investing. You did put a big chunk of money, $2 million into our safety net providers to help with what we've identified as our number one issue within behavioral health, which is assuring that we have a workforce who can serve the public. The biggest issue we run into now is waiting lists. And we have large waiting lists because we don't have enough people or enough resources in the community to meet the needs of our citizens. So that funding has been extremely helpful. I work very closely with these organizations, and they continue to report that turnover has gone down and that hiring has gone up. And we're going to be able to share much more detail about that as this moves on. Additionally, I'm a public health person, so I always like to say everything is interconnected. So we've already touched on food pantries. We've already touched on homelessness. So the board also put some quick money out there to help organizations with their immediate needs. And I think especially with the pandemic, that's critical. Now, what I'd like to look at is more long-term. How do we put a system together where we can have something that we can continue? So we have some immediate needs, but we need to continue that in the future. Over the past year, the health department, just in the last few months, we've launched our Thrive by 2025 initiative. So this is really something that's bringing together all of these different ideas to create a common vision for our community. So as we look at resources that are coming in from different places, this is going to enable us to work more cohesively together and to get leadership from different sectors on board. We have been working very closely with young people, with families, and with professionals across a whole variety of different industries and sectors to identify what the needs are and what it is that we should be doing. So we feel like we have a good picture of that right now. And then just in the past 3 months, we've secured over $500,000 in outside grants to support these efforts. I don't know if there's a question or no.
Anyone have a question at this point?
Okay, very
Mr.
good.
Leonard? Mr. Leonard has. a question.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Isaacson, you know, I forget off the top of my head what the allocation was to the health department with ARPA funds. Could you refresh my memory on that?
Absolutely. And actually, I have that on the next slide, sir. So I'll get to that in just a
Thank
moment.
you.
I have
Madam Chair.
a question. I realize that just the external agencies with Dundee and Elgin Township. I learned last week that Dundee has allocated $50,000 annually. 500, thank you. I
And
thought that was too low.
Elgin was 40,000.
40,000, and that would just simply be a needs assessment. So as these townships are looking at needs assessment, is that something we can help them with? Because now I believe that Elgin now is locked into that $40,000 and can only raise it up incrementally every year. Is that
Right,
accurate?
I believe that you've got.
Mr.
two
Tepe
different-
speaking.
This is Tepe here, sure. My understanding is that Dundee Township did put forth a levy for $500,000 for their 708 mental health board. That then automatically reduced the amount of the levy that had been approved by the voters by 67%.
Right.
So they decimated the original amount that had been approved by the voters. The board did that on their own, and unfortunately, they can do that. In Elgin, my understanding is that they originally had a 708 mental health board that they decided to dismiss, which I think was done illegally, but that's another point. Then they've created a new mental health board that is now kind of struggling to get started. My understanding is they did no levy for this year and have loaned the mental health committee monies to do an evaluation and determining what they can do.
But that's. the
I don't
40
know
cents.
if by doing no levy, they have now reduced the amount to zero or not. We'll probably have to look at that legally. But it's clear to me that these township boards don't know what they're doing.
Mr. Surgeons.
Hey, Mike, Surges here. Do me, if I speak out of line, pick up that 2x4 and whack me with that. So my understanding is that Michael Isaacson and our health department has reached out. And Jared, I think you were at that meeting at the 708 board where we are, this is in, I'm so sorry. Yes, this is in Dundee, where we will coordinate or at least endeavor to coordinate that research with Mike's team and allow them to initiate what the needs analysis is. It doesn't really make sense to me for everybody to be doing their own. If we have one large coordinated effort, I mean, there's just an economy of scale there. And Michael was so kind to come out along with Delilah, make that presentation, kind of outline it, gave plenty of time for us to take feedback. I have questions, everybody has questions, to just say, what's the best product that we can get as a result of this as we're moving forward? And I think this is just an outstanding baseline. And Michael, thank you again for being so gracious on that.
Great, thank you. And I think that it really underscores the need and why I view this as an investment, because we perhaps could have gotten ahead of some of those conversations if we had more infrastructure in place, if we'd been able to answer questions and provide more information, which does require resources to collect that information. So as I continue with my presentation here, I think that's something that's exactly to the point is that we need all of the organizations working together. The need is very great, but we also, and I view this as from the county health department perspective, we need to be able to get information to each local community so people can make the appropriate decisions. So we're looking forward to moving forward with that. So we have received a fair amount of grant funding just in the last couple of months. It's kind of piggybacking on Ms. Gumb's comments with the previous presentation. I view this not so much as replacement, but I believe by making this investment, we are going to become a magnet to draw more needed resources into our community. So I think looking here at what's happening at the federal and state level, of course, 988 is launched. There's some different funding coming through different federal organizations, some of those through justice, some of those through public health, some of them through substance use and mental health. So we're actively looking at those. Some of those may be opportunities for the county to apply for. Some of them may be opportunities where we're providing a support role to community organizations to be able to apply. At the state level, there's been a lot of changes just here in the new year where they've rolled out some different things. Part of that in response to 988 and how we're managing mobile crisis. We have something called Pathways to Success, which is creating better structure and better support for us to get out there and help families. So we've really been monitoring a lot of these things to make sure where we put the funding from the ARPA request, that it's in areas that aren't already being paid by somewhere else. And again, with an eye towards sustainability. And then locally, as was already mentioned, we have 2 new 708 boards that have been going through discussions. And I think there's more we can do. And there's certainly open-ended questions about the funding from those 708 boards. But we're all in this together, including new 708 boards and existing 708 boards, to assure that we're working together. So I'm going to get into the dollars in a moment here. But what I really want to focus on is, yes, there's immediate needs. So we do want to provide, and I would advocate for funding for those things. We want to support community organizations. So I just want to touch on the comment that this is an internal request, quote unquote, but over 90% of this money is going to go out into the community to support our community organizations. So I just want to make that very clear. And this really, and this to me is the most important part, is this, I really think if it's successful, it needs to serve as a catalyst. So we can provide a service for somebody who's in need tomorrow, and then the money's gone. And then next week, we're still in the same situation. I think we really need to challenge ourselves, and we're asking for a lot of money. And again, I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. where we really want to change how we're doing a lot of these things so that we can have lasting improvement and not just one-time interventions. So that's what we really want to focus on. Next slide, please, Blair.
I have a. if-
Madam
Oh, yes,
Chair,
ma'am.
quickly.
Michael, and just to the committee, I had a wonderful conversation last week with a number of township supervisors who are represented primarily up in northern Kane. And independently, after my presentation, they were asking me about a countywide, what are our efforts moving forward on a countywide 708 board. We've had that previous conversation. It was determined at that time by the request of other townships, a variety of different townships, that while a countywide 708 board is something that may be of interest, there are well-functioning 708 boards peppered throughout the county that are existing. And they were concerned about their ability to do local targeted service. However, following up on what you were talking about, Michael, of being able to do assessments and being able to save resources, efficiency, economy of scale, just like we're doing the Economic Development Council, which would be countywide. Could you possibly consider, as a potential funding opportunity with ARPA, initiating a countywide mental health advisory board so that those studies could be targeted specifically per communities, whether it is through gun violence, which we talked about at a previous meeting, whether it is fentanyl use, whether it is domestic abuse, and target what areas are being impacted, what are the impacts of that, so that those unique taxpayers' resources can go directly to delivery of services rather than the research.
Absolutely. And I think that was very well said. Thank you. And that goes right in line with what we're proposing, because we absolutely need to be able to do that. And I think it is much more efficient for all of our taxpayers, not only getting them better services, but making better use of the funding. So yes, Madam Chair, I'm 100% supportive of something like that. And looking here at what we've requested, and I'll kind of echo that same theme that Madam Chair just brought up. What we're looking forward to doing over the next several months here, we'd like to hire several staff. And again, even if this is short term, part of my work will be looking at sustainability for this. But I need a couple of people who can really help with the information, including people who are working with the data. And I think it gets directly to that assessment and making sure we're on the same page and making sure we're collecting the right information. Certainly managing the funding for these organizations. So we're going to be paying for professional services out in the community. This is going to be a heavy lift with a lot of complex moving parts. So some additional resources in the department are going to be helpful for that. We viewed through 2024 that's going to be just over $500,000 for those three individuals. We're also, as I mentioned before, and I'm trying to keep this a little bit high level today, but I'm happy to provide more background information and additional detail if anybody's interested. But workforce is still the key issue that we're looking at. So launching this over the next several years, where we're going to put out requests for proposals, requests for qualifications, where we can identify organizations in the community. We've already been having conversations. We've already been talking about the exact types of things that need to be done. We need to go through the appropriate process and make sure that we're meeting all of the county requirements to give people an opportunity to participate in this process. So looking at how do we build up our workforce. So that means looking at how do we change how we're bringing new professionals or people who are changing careers into this. How do we look at making sure that we have enough people who are, for example, speaking the languages that people may need their services in? How do we make sure that regardless where you live in the community, there's someone who's there that can serve you? The model of bringing everyone into your business has changed a bit. So we want to make sure that we can bring resources to people. So building on existing relationships and existing agreements and contracts we have with higher education, both community colleges and our universities, really building on that. And again, I think this is an area that is going to be a tremendous investment that's going to bring more resources from different state and federal and private funders to help support this in the future, continuing to look at recruiting and retention, and then looking at training. So we have new needs that are coming up. We have a lot of younger people who are struggling. And this is something that a lot of providers haven't had a lot of experience with, where now we have 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds who are getting therapy that we need to make sure that we're providing and supporting our organization so that they can meet those needs. And you can imagine if that's not done, these children, and again, I'm not pointing a finger at a 5-year-old, but it's not you don't just kick them out of school and they move out of Kane County and move to an island somewhere. One, you've got a child who may be suffering. 2, they're causing disruption in their learning environment, and whether they get shifted to other learning environments, they're potentially still a disruption there. So we need to be able to support not only the family, but also the professionals that are engaging with them. So we're estimating here, this is where the largest investment is going to be. And we're expecting this to be probably around 30 to 45 different projects that we're pushing out. And over the next several years, that would be just over $4.7 million. And then the next category that we looked at is how do we expand and better address the unmet needs that are occurring? And this is where we really, really focus on being kind of across different sectors and working with law enforcement, working with courts, also looking at what's going on with the families, that it's not just therapy they need. It's not just substance use counseling that somebody needs, but there's other things going on that we need to be proactive. And we have an opportunity because there's models out there in the country that have been proven to work. And if we're aggressive here in our community, we're going to be able to see dramatic changes where we're improving people's health. And again, I'll just keep repeating, and that's going to allow us to bring additional resources in from other people as we're doing that. And I always want to mention adverse childhood experiences or trauma. That's something we need to get better at. We've seen an increase in violence over the past couple of years in our homes. We've seen an increase in crimes with youth against youth. So how do we dig in and really address that? It's just as an example, it sticks in my mind when we work with our partners at the Juvenile Justice Center and Court Services. They estimate that over 95% of the young women who come through the Juvenile Justice Center there have been sexually abused. So we know that's something. So we're potentially locking someone up who's been a victim throughout their formative years. We know there's proven interventions we can put in place to better support families, starting before people have children, when they're new mothers with home visiting, things like that. So a lot of interventions that we can put here. We estimate that to really have a tremendous investment there, it's going to be about $4.5 million over the next couple of years. And just one note about the types of interventions we're doing. This is not here's how to address mental health, and there's a list of 3 things. We're actually looking at evidence bases that touch on many different issues. So there's whole sets of guidelines for how to address domestic violence, how to address hunger, how to address homelessness, how to address substance use disorders. And all of these things go together and are tangled. So we want to be putting in approaches when again, this is part of the benefit of Thrive by 2025, where we are taking a collective look at those things so that we can get the best outcomes. And then finally, having a communication campaign. And this is both for the public so that people are aware of what's happening. This can be signs and symptoms of mental health issues. This can be support, especially as we continue to work at the waiting list that we're seeing, so that families can go and get information from local providers about what they can do to better manage, especially if it's a young person or another loved one in their life, that they can get some support. And also this ties up into some of the training things too, that we can put out information to help train people and get more information about, for example, how to administer naloxone to potentially save someone's life if they're overdosing from a fentanyl or an opioid overdose. So for that, we anticipate about $250,000 over the next couple of years. And that includes really raising awareness of these things and getting specific information to specific audiences. And this isn't one audience. This isn't 5 audiences. This is a whole slew of different people that need different information. Parents of a 5-year-old who's struggling need completely different information than say parents of a 20-year-old who's already been arrested 3 times need completely different information than what we're going to be providing to our senior population who may be struggling with opioids because of what they're being prescribed, et cetera. Any questions on the dollars? And again, I can provide background information and more detail on any of this.
Madam Chair, you have a question?
Actually, I have a thought, and I see he was in here. I've been doing some individual research about social equity bonds, and they're a complicated bond that they use to support environmental issues, things like also homelessness, reducing recidivism, et cetera. I know that we've got our chair of finance and vice chair of finance. If they can reach out to our treasurer, and perhaps the treasurer can present at the next meeting, a little bit of preliminary research on if we are eligible to do a social equity bond, because that would provide sustained funding for these programs, which would, this is a $10 million cost, which money for ARP is to be used for that, certainly. But how does that sustain, Michael, once we get past those resources? Because mental health issues, equity issues are not going to disappear.
Yeah, that's excellent. I would love to learn more about that. That's very good.
Would that be all right? Yeah, good. Thank you.
He just left right before you said that.
They'll get it to him.
He'll hear, yeah.
And then I think I just have 1 or 2 more slides here, but it looks like the presentation's gone down. Thank you, sir. So next slide, please. And then so that's behavioral health. And then quickly on chronic disease. Chronic disease is also one of our top 4 health issues that we've identified in our community health assessment. It is the leading cause of premature death in our community. We're going to be sharing more information about this over the coming months. Key risk factors, overweight, obesity, which of course, like so many other things, has gone up during the pandemic, but it's on an upward trend for many years. Physical inactivity, poor nutrition. Those are things that we're really focusing on, is how do we look at prevention and how do we use proven interventions so that we can get information to our residents to help them make the best choices. And it's not just education, it's not just information, but it's really looking at what types of programs, like things like the workplace wellness program that the county has implemented. We've seen measurable success with that over the years. In terms of seeing improvements from people. So continuing to support efforts like that. And I want to draw on, especially this gets to the health equity piece. When we look at COVID as one example, as one snapshot, the inequities in health that we see across our community. And again, these are largely in public health. We talk about place matters, or if you tell me somebody's zip code, I can tell you how healthy they're going to be. These are the kind of things that from a public health perspective, we really look at. So for chronic disease, we saw, especially in our Latino and our African-American population, disparate adverse outcomes because of COVID, where we were seeing younger people dying because of pre-existing health conditions. So this is an underlying thing, which is very complex, but for this particular intervention, it's really focused on how do we make sure that we're getting resources out there in an equitable way so that all of our residents can take advantage of being healthy. So again, as I mentioned, risk factors and poor outcomes are not distributed equally. Next slide, please. And this one's a little simpler to describe. This is really looking at us continuing the work we're doing with, we have a multi-sectoral equity or a team now. We call it new. It's nutrition, exercise, and weight. Really looking at how do we proactively address these things that are driving many of the chronic diseases. So that group is poised and ready to utilize this funding to kind of springboard the work that they're doing to make better improvements. And then this is really focused on how do we coordinate outreach and activities to promote healthier behavior, again, through evidence-based interventions. So our next step over the next couple of months is to identify professionals that we can work with and enter into professional service agreements with to help us with that outreach, because this is not something that we currently have internal capacity. We don't have chronic disease explicit funding right now to address these things. But just like I said, with the behavioral health, once we start doing these things, it's going to be a magnet for more funding that we're going to be able to look at more sustainability in the future. Total cost for this, we're estimating, including all the outreach materials and the staff or professional service agreements, is $365,000. And that's a high level update on both of those asks. I'm happy to respond to any other questions or provide additional detail.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Isaacson. Any questions or comments? I know it's a lot to chew on. But again, that's why we wanted to have these presentations today, so you got a good feeling for what's going on and what's to come.
Mr. Chairman,
See your thoughts, sir, and I'll come back to you. Bates.
where can we find these slides later on?
Mr. Isaacson, can you send that out?
Absolutely.
And Mr.
great.
Van Kerkhoff, please.
Or
Is
if
he
you
there?
send them to Jenny Smith, she can send them to the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, any other
Mr. Chair
questions?
Gums.
Gums, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacson. I just want to say, something that draws my attention. Obviously, this is wonderful. The communication and outreach is, I think, a very key component. I mean, we can talk about all the fabulous programs that we're going to put in place or are working on putting in place, by the expertise that is clearly in front of us now. But if we don't communicate that and get that into the community, as is right now, they're kind of worthless for most of the community. So I would like to see, I currently do a lot of community events, and we speak about these issues. So when we talk about sustainability, I'm your tax girl, right? We're going to have to raise taxes. I literally talk to people about those things. And he always, says that everything is interconnected. So when we do that outreach and we're starting that process, I would like the county to do these community events, to host them with the panel of all of the folks that we're working with. That's currently what I do with some other groups. So that would be fantastic, in my opinion. And this is wonderful. Thank you.
Excellent. And I think just building on that, and I agree completely. Thank you. For any board members who would like more specific events like that in your district, because you know your district better than anybody else. So the health department is happy to come in and work with you and help bring in other partners that we're working with on some of these. And again, this is we call it behavioral health, or we call it chronic disease, but it's a myriad of different things that go into it. And there's a lot of really fantastic people at the health department, but really fantastic organizations in the community that we can help to organize as well for events like that. So great idea.
Thank you, Michael.
Time to go.
Mr. Chairman, Bates, please.
Bates, go ahead.
I'd like to just reinforce what Mr. Isaacson said about, we call these internal requests, but this is all going out to the community. So it's internal started requests that are going out to the community. So we're using I think we've done a good job in using our ARP money wisely so far. And did we allocate $10 million to the to this program?
Yes.
Was that the original?
Yeah, it was a little over 10. I
Okay,
think, now,
so
the actual number.
with all the, I wasn't adding up the numbers as you listed them. Have you used up your 10 million or allocated your 10 million or?
Yeah,
assigned it?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't doing math. Now it's occurred to me. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think the total request is 10 million and 20,000 happened to be where the dollars came in.
Okay,
Mr.
tapping
Leonard.
off the tank. Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to agree with Ms. Bates on her statement about these really being external monies that are going out. I know she and I have had discussions about not enough money goes to the community. And in fact, if you take a look at development and health alone, in those two areas, we have over 20 million going out to the community. So I think there is some justification for the fact that we are trying to take care of the community as well as our own internal concerns.
right.
And if I may, I'll just add on with, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Isaacson.
With Ms. Gum's comments going on with what Mr. Leonard just said, part of how we tell the story has to include how we are utilizing these funds. I agree, and that's part of being successful at it. It's not political. It is showing the community how we're making these investments, and again, how we're showing other funders how we're making these investments. So I think that has to be a big measure of success for us at the health department with these funds is how we're able to work with the county to tell the story. So I agree. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
I thank you, Mr. Leonard, for stating that. I totally agree. We are the community. We're not separate from.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You buy a piece of
Agreed.
paper, it's not for your individual use to make a paper airplane from. It's used to print something out that is either you're working on a project that will impact the community, impact better services through here, or direct resource, literally direct resource out to the community. If you take a look at the money we spend on our roads and transportation, it's the community who drives on those roads.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Alan,
Ms. Allen, go ahead.
people sometimes say I represent the institutional memory. I just wanted to mention that what Mr. Isaacson is doing and what Madam Chairman is doing is so critical. Some years ago, we did a study to see how could we be most useful in addressing the whole county's concerns. And you have to be very careful about stepping on toes. There are people who have very carefully built organizations, sometimes silos, to help people in their neighborhoods. And we all get that, we understand that. But we want to try and embrace them and bring them into a countywide umbrella, because there's always somebody who makes a phone call from St. Charles Township who doesn't quite fall into St. Charles's 708 board and doesn't quite fall into one of the southern 708 boards, but is out there in the hinterlands looking for some help. And by virtue of Madam Chairman and Mr. Isaacson saying that this is a countywide overview, we can help that guy who's in St. Charles Township and has no one else to turn to. And so I really applaud the efforts of saying we're not trying to steal somebody else's thunder. We just want to try and bring all this together with this wonderful manna from heaven money and build as many programs as we can that will reach as many people in our community as we can. So really thank you for those efforts. This is a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. There's one more to go, though. So save the praises for Ms. Wolnick, Director of Environmental Water Resources. She's going to give us an update on her projects. It's coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here this morning to discuss our ARPA projects that fall under Kane County Department of Environmental and Water Resources. I'm going to start with if that's it's a well and tell, it determines what the water level is on a residential well. It's a great picture because we got snow today and snow in the picture. I'm going to start with our 4 groundwater sustainability projects that were approved by this committee in fall of last year. The slides that I'll be showing this morning are courtesy of Illinois State Water Survey. Daniel Abrams put these together. They are draft slides. And so this is one of the items that we're going to be working in a lot of detail to really nail down what our numbers are. But for anyone that's not familiar with our groundwater and our surface water supplies here in Kane County, a figure to kind of go by is anyone using our deep aquifer system in this region, 60% of those current demands on that system would have to be removed in order for that system to be sustainable. And so that's the starting point for us, is that we're already in such a deficit in our water supply here in our area that it really is critical to everything moving forward, including our residential population, our economic development, and how we move forward as a county. As many of you probably remember, in the late 80s and early 90s, many of the communities that were on this deep aquifer system started to move off onto Lake Michigan water for that very same reason. We do know now that the Joliet area, as well as some of our southern communities, are going to be moving off onto that Lake Michigan supply in the coming years. But even with them all moving off the deep aquifer system, we are still in an extreme deficit in our deep aquifer supply for our area. These again are draft maps, but even with no new demands, and this would be demands potentially coming from outside of the area, large industries, people moving off of other supplies like shallow aquifers into the deep supply. By the time we hit 2050, we are seeing issues in our deep aquifer system and declining production in both our northern and southern areas of Kane County. If we increase the demands on that deep aquifer system, which could include new industries, or like I said, shallower supplies moving off into the deeper supplies, that demand and that risk furthers, and then the supply from that system is decreased in years. So the take-home points from this is that these new demands and drivers of additional supply from that deep water system just exacerbate a problem that already exists today. So what is the issue with our shallow aquifer supply? The main issue in our area is contamination, mainly from our road salts. They are increasing our chloride levels in our shallow aquifers. In 2003, we measured 65 wells in Kane County. These are mostly residential wells. And by the time we remeasured the chloride levels in 2015, we actually had to add a category because some of those wells had increased by over 200 milligrams per liter in that just over 10-year period. On average, the wells in Eastern Kane County are increasing almost 50 milligrams per liter per year. So the drinking water standard for chloride is 500 milligrams per liter. At that point, the water will start tasting salty, and folks with medical issues will start having issues drinking that water. And you see on the photo up there, that is the St. Charles Aquifer. It's a shallow aquifer that is heavily used in our area by South Elgin, St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia. And there's been extreme increases in the chloride levels that we've measured in that aquifer system, as well as identified PFAS, PFOA issues on the northern area of that aquifer. So these are the supplies that are at risk, that the communities potentially would need to look at different supplies in the future, which unfortunately, again, trying to go to that deeper system, we already realize that there's more demand than there is supply. So what will the next well be? You've got the unsustainable groundwater withdrawals from our deeper system, and then you have the PFAS standards that will be coming out very soon, and the rising chloride levels in our shallow aquifers. So where does that leave us here as Kane County, and how does this wrap into the ARPA committee? Data. So the numbers that we have are estimates. The Illinois State Water Survey is continually updating the data in their water models with more accurate data. And so in order to kind of piece out what kind of scenarios we might have for the future and what our municipalities might have for options for their future water supply planning, we need that additional data. So again, there were 4 projects that were approved by this committee in fall of last year. I'll briefly go through each project and the status of those projects. The first one being an evaluation of the shallow aquifer systems, including that St. Charles aquifer system, for $272,000. The contract was signed this month with Illinois State Water Survey. We're going to be working directly with our municipalities, the elected officials and their public works directors to develop different scenarios and run those scenarios through the model to determine what is our best option for the future to ensure a sustainable water supply for Kane County. The next project is $60,000 in funding from ARPA to Illinois State Water Survey as well. This is a resampling of those 64 shallow aquifers, including in the St. Charles aquifer for chlorides and other contaminants. All this information will be fed into the model and we'll start piecing out what kind of time frame we have until we start seeing those water quality issues. And when we pair that with the $272,000 project, it will drive the different scenarios that we are going to assess for the future supply of Kane County. The $219,000 project, the contract is in progress, and that is for a real-time well monitoring network in Kane County. So as they move forward with the water model, we do have some areas in the county that we have very little data for. These might be areas such as Big Rock Township, where there's no deep wells, and other areas specifically along the Fox River that we have incomplete information on what our groundwater elevations are, what our withdrawals are. And so this will help improve that as well as provide communities with real-time monitoring data that can be analyzed and looked at on a website so they can start seeing patterns in the declines in the aquifers as well as during drought scenarios to see if they might have issues with where their wells are set. The third project is with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. Always in water supply planning, the lowest hanging fruit is water conservation. And so while we move forward with the formal water modeling and determining of these future scenarios, in the meantime, we can always be conserving more water. So we have several areas in the county that have already reached out to us over the years, asking for assistance with outdoor watering issues, issues that might apply to leakage within their system, issues with high water use fixtures. And so that contract has also been signed, and we are in the process of working with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant to go out for a request for projects to our communities and start looking at which projects we will move forward with, providing them the resources to assist them in doing the water conservation that they need to do. Any questions on the water supply planning
If I
portion
saw
of
your
things?
hand go up earlier, did you?
You know, Jody, this is like hocus pocus to me. I don't understand it all 100%. As I've voiced before, I am familiar with the aquifer levels and was on the board of Gilbert's when we went into this and that. My general question, and there's been so many conversations about developments in Arizona that have just flat run out of water. They're actually trucking it into their subdivisions because they goofed. My question to you, and just fundamentally, is the concept of squeezing a balloon and it pops out someplace else. To say we're going to go take the water from Lake Michigan, does the lake do anything to replenish these other aquifers? Are they all tied in together? how does that work? I don't understand all that. It's kind of an enigma to me. Like, are we saying, hey, you guys in St. Charles, you tapped into this one and you're gonna run out here, but that's okay, drill to the next one because that's fed from somebody? Or I just think it's fascinating that we can actually do all this stuff, but I don't understand what the end game is.
The end game is to get to the point, is what you kind of just said, is that the water coming into our area is as much as we're using, right? So there's a lot of complicated answers to what you just asked. In general, our shallow aquifers are supplied very quickly from local recharge. And so the rain, the snow, what falls on our ground, the more you pave areas, the less recharge there is in that shallow area. But the biggest challenge with that isn't the supply in the shallow system, it's the water quality. And so we're doing things because it is so quickly recharged. What you put on the ground results in contamination of that system. And so while you might have a plentiful supply, what is the cost of treating that water? So it's always going to recharge, but at some point there's a reason why there's not many people treating ocean water. And that's exactly what we're going to end up doing because we're increasing those chlorides in our shallow system. And so there's a cost to that. And is the cost to that more or less than the cost of, for example, going to Lake Michigan water, depending on what community you are? The deeper aquifer is a much more complicated scenario because our recharge actually comes from southern Wisconsin. And so we're talking thousands of years as opposed to a couple years to recharge that. So that's really a volume-based system where the more the water you're using is using volume that isn't going to be replenished in any of our lifetimes. And so that's more, the quality is staying good because it takes so long to get there. But at the same time, you have a finite volume because you have so little coming in and so much going out that it's not reasonable to say that we could somehow recharge this in the near term and get a longer supply from that. And that's kind of where that balancing act comes through with the different scenarios that are going to be run. Is if certain people go on to Lake Michigan water, that extends the life of an aquifer system for other people. And then you look at our communities along the Fox River. Some communities are much closer to Lake Michigan water at a reasonable rate, as opposed to others that are much further away. And so we've got Western Kane County that potentially doesn't have as much access to like the Fox River or Lake Michigan water. And so they're relying on the other communities to ensure that groundwater supply for them. And so it's a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different options. And that's why we want to work very closely with our municipalities, because they're doing the on the ground planning for their water supply, but they can't, as an individual community, do this kind of like regional planning. And so we give them the data, they take the data, and from that data, they can make those decisions.
What a great explanation. Thank you so much. Yes, truly.
Mr. Tepe.
Yes, thanks. Jody, 2 points. One, are there any communities getting water from Lake Michigan now? And two, how can we encourage other communities to get water from Lake Michigan?
The only communities in Kane County are Oswego, Yorkville, and Montgomery are working as a team to get Lake Michigan water. They aren't currently, they're working on their allocation. So there, like I mentioned, there are communities that it would make more sense for them for our long-term supply. But we also have communities on the Fox River that have river plants that potentially have more capacity. And so that's something that this study is going to dive into that level of detail and give those options to our communities as well as the data to support it.
Madam Chair.
To answer Lake Michigan water, it's a finite resource. It's not infinite. So that everybody in Illinois cannot have access to it. It's allocated. If any of the money, it costs money. The money is one because it is expensive. But the other issue is that we would be getting it from DuPage County, who has allocation, which again is restricted and finite. So we don't just put a straw into Lake Michigan water and suck it out. It's distributed because we want to make sure that Lake Michigan water remains intact, and it's a federal allocation. It's not a local allocation. But I do have one question, please, regarding the last grant that we're going to be researching out, asking our communities, the 265,000. That's going, if I've read it correctly, to 5 communities. Is that be an RFP process?
Yes, a request for projects that's going to go out through Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. We're looking at approximately 5 projects. So depending on the scope of each project, they will be reaching out to professionals at the University of Illinois, because they have different professionals depending on what type of project that the community is asking them to research. So it might be full cost of water pricing. We don't want to do conservation because that's where some of our revenue is coming from. So they might be looking at the revenue side of things, is if we implement water conservation, how do we ensure our revenue? Well, that's a more on the accounting side of things, as opposed to leak detection and how do we stand up a program to get lower flush toilets or something to that effect. And so there's different professionals that will be engaging from the University of Illinois, depending on the project requests that we receive.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Leonard and then Mr. Kenyon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jody, a question for you. And once again, I'm not knowledgeable on water, so please excuse my ignorance here. But with respect to the shallow wells where the contamination has become much worse, the chlorine levels have gone up, would either commercially or residentially a reverse osmosis system correct that or remediate that?
Reverse osmosis is a big topic of discussion right now. It would correct it. The problem is, for every gallon of water produced in an RO system, you're rejecting 5 gallons. And so you have such a differential in the amount of water you're able to use versus the amount of water that's rejected. You go back into the conversation of how much water we're using. Now, if everyone's putting in RO systems, then all of a sudden you've like 5 times as much water is needing to be used to get that water to where we need it to be. So it goes back to that same challenge of like quality versus quantity.
You know, that's a very good answer. I guess my concern on that is if for every 5 gallons that you use through this reverse osmosis system, well, every 6, I guess, you get 1 good quality gallon and then 5 bad quality. What happens to that other 5 gallons of water?
It goes into the wastewater system. So if you're in an individual house in rural Kane County, it's going into your septic system. Otherwise, it's going into a treatment plant and then down the Fox River.
Thank you.
Mr. Kenyon.
Kenyon here. As I sit through these meetings, I rate this the best meeting of the month. There's a lot of information for our future and our children's future. I think this should all be available to the board, every member, all 24 people. And then a question I have for you, Jody. Can we find recharge areas? You know where I live, and at one time there was like a 50-acre lake over in Cook County that if they left it alone and didn't fill it, there would have been a beautiful recharge area. Do we have areas like this that we could use and not develop?
Yes, it's certainly something we're going to be looking at as part of the project. One of the concerns that I didn't include the slides with today is the biological side of things. Mainly those recharge areas are recharging our wetlands and our streams that you speak of, and it's not necessarily related to the immediate water supply because not many people have wells that are that shallow. But if you continue to draw down that water, what ends up happening is you reduce that discharge into our streams, and then you're affecting things from a biological side of things. So you have issues with mussels and all of our plants and animals that thrive in those environments. Suddenly we start losing those. So there's that aspect of things on the ecological side of things, as well as the drinking water side of things.
Mr. Berman.
Yes, Berman here. You know, the municipalities in King County have been working on this problem for quite a while through the Metro West and the Northwest Water Planning Alliance. So I've been involved in that for, 10 years anyway. But conservation has done a lot to help us cut down on our water consumption. And that's really important. And that's a significant thing that for the future for us. But there's all kinds of ideas of how to conserve and help us in the future. You know, so it's not something that hasn't been studied and worked on, and the Illinois Water Group is very active. So I'm glad that we're getting more deeply involved in it.
I have a couple more slides if there's.
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
More.
Dude, we're like on item B. Yeah.
So the fifth project we have that was approved by the board was approved this January is the Ogden Gardens lead containing water service line replacement project. I have the photos from the current ongoing projects out there at Ogden Gardens. It's a subdivision of about 122 residents. It's an unincorporated Aurora Township, pretty much surrounded by the city of Aurora. And it's 75% low to moderate income. So just reading off the EPA's website, there is no safe level of lead because lead containing service lines will convey this harmful substance to the drinking water supply. Full water service line replacement is necessary and effective in reliably achieving long-term reductions in drinking water lead levels. So we've been working in Ogden Gardens for 30 years. We've been working on this project. The plans were actually dated 1996. And it is a full replacement of the water lines in the subdivision as well as the water storage tank. Both those projects, phase 1 and phase 2, were funded through the community development block grants. So phase 3 will be the full reconstruction of all the water services in the neighborhood. We have requested $1.7 million in total, specifically from ARPA, which was approved in January, $470,000 of that. And we are awaiting word from CDBG on the balance of that funding. So we're hopefully looking forward to 2023, now that the other two projects are nearing completion, to begin replacing the 122 water services in that subdivision. And that will provide them with a complete new renovated system that has not really been addressed since the 1920s when it was originally installed. I just wanted to list out for the committee because we are providing updates on all of our requests. These are our remaining requests that are pending for our department. We have a number of floodplain requests that are critical to our understanding of our flood elevations in the county. We've been meeting with engineering firms to develop the scope on that and are hoping that we can get that one moving forward. Because these projects do take some time to get stood up and then moved along. It would be great to work towards that funding this year, as well as our cost share program funding. We have a number of other drainage projects that have been sitting there for probably over 20 years that we'd like to get completed, as well as our wetland mapping and our flood buyout program. We have at the bottom, we have some requests that were to relieve pressure on the riverboat funds for our drainage cost share program consultant, our USGS gauging stations along the Fox River, and our recycling and commodities services through our environmental management side of our department. That was the last slide. Any questions?
Ms. Gumbs, I see your hand is up. Is that current?
Yeah, kind of. I just wanted to bring something to the attention in regard to the lead pipe replacement project. A lot of folks don't understand when I have that conversation with them that you worded it correctly. And so for the public, the full line replacement. So there are folks that do not understand that there's a partial line replacement. And so when, for example, and I've had this unfortunate occasion to learn this about 5 or 6 years ago. So we had a water main break. Your village, some villages handle this, or your city will come out and they will fix that water main break. And I discovered that recently here in Aurora, they changed their ordinance so that the city was not going to cover the cost to replace that lead line from the box to your house. So for some folks, that could be, 10 feet. Some folks, it's going to be 50 feet. And for my purposes, I believe it was like $7,000 or $8,000 for me to replace that line, which folks cannot afford. And I just found that ridiculous at some level. But when we discuss that with folks, we need to explain that the whole line has to be replaced, not just part of it.
Any other questions or comments for Ms. Wolnick? Mr. Sturgis?
I just love the things like the flood drone reconnaissance program.
You can make a comic book on that.
I think that's like a superhero type deal there. So
I'm in.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Bates?
things like the dark fiber, exactly.
on the last slide, how big is that tank? Is that bigger than a person or bigger than a?
Yeah, it's bigger than a person. It's 10,000 gallons.
So if a person were standing next to it, it would be bigger than me or?
Yeah, I believe it's about 10 feet tall on the, with its, the braces that it sits
And
on.
what's the purpose of the tank? Why do they need a tank?
It's similar to your water towers and your larger systems. And so
okay.
it provides water if your well were to go out, and it reduces the number of times your well has to run. And so you have
Okay.
that storage available. They don't have fire flow out there. So, and many times in a larger system, it would be attributed to the fire flow, but because of the size of the system, they cannot meet fire flow. But luckily there are some City of Aurora larger mains nearby that can service that neighborhood for fire flow.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we move on? All right, thank you, Ms. Wolnick, for presenting to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. As Mr. Leonard had mentioned earlier, that what you just heard is over $20 million in ARPA funds that's out there going into the community that's in process right now. So very important stuff. I'm glad we got to hear all that today. Our next section, we're going to talk about upcoming projects. And to start that off, Mr. Phillips is going to briefly go over our risk assessment to resolution process. I know there's a slide Blair is going to pull up. Mr. Phillips.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the risk assessment to resolution process, and this will shed some light on Mr. Teppe's question or answer. So I will just briefly show you the diagram that was created off of the bulleted process. We have currently 18 county department projects that are, and this does not work, that are in stages 2 and 3. And you have this handout we distributed. It might be easier for you to look on paper, but each of these stages has 1 to 4 steps in the stage to advance to the next. And as Director Wolnick had aptly placed on one of her slides, data. And stages 2 and 3 is really the bulk of the work of fleshing out the data that is required. And it is specifically identified within the Treasury guidance as to what the expectations for supplying data, justification for the use of the money, and a descriptive narrative of how the monies that will be spent will actually affect the outcome desired. So that is, we reside in stages 2 and 3 for 18 projects, several of which we anticipate presenting via resolution in March, or excuse me, in February to the committee. And the step after the resolution resides in stage 4. And then stages 5 and 6 is really the dissemination of the funds ultimately at the end of the process. So we have spent the great portion of the last year staging and preparing for where we're about to be next month. None of the systems were in place in the county to do this. None of the websites, none of the portals, none of the processes, none of the personnel. So in the past year, we have done that, and we're about to, as Mr. Sanchez said, harvest some of the fruits. And I do look forward to presenting the resolutions next month, and for some of the departments to catch up to the community support grant, which we are probably going to be winding down through 2023. So again, this diagram does reside on the ARP SharePoint site. And actually the ARP SharePoint stays current as of the last week's reporting. So all the data from all the community support grant and the department grants does reside in the SharePoint. That'll be the link I'll send out today. You'll see the data current as of last week. Tomorrow that will replicate. The site will replicate. So if you clicked on the same link Friday, you should see the updated statistics through tomorrow afternoon. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those now. And of course, my office is up on the 4th floor, room 406. Sometimes it's difficult if you just stop by, but if people prearrange, I'd be happy to go over any process that someone has a question on.
You're
Any
saying you
questions
don't
or
like the
comments?
pot buying. Sorry,
Ms. Gums, go ahead.
I said, he's saying he doesn't like the pop in.
Oh, I
concur.
Poppin's great, but sometimes I may be unavailable, though in the office.
Mr. Chairman
Understood.
Bates, please.
Bates, go ahead.
So Mr. Phillips, what kind of risk are we talking about? Is this like risk of not being eligibility risk, or slipping and falling on the ice risk, or what kind of risk?
There's a variety of risks. It really is dependent on the project. At the moment, the risk for the county is eligibility. So that
Okay.
assessment has to be made and established. Eligibility has to be established in advance. And the ultimate risk to that is lack of due diligence, and eligibility in 2026 and 2027 may result in monies being taken back by the federal government.
That's a lot of risk. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this process? We just wanted you guys to see this so you understood that we do have a system. Madam Chair.
I've had several community organizations who've reached out to me regarding requests for additional funds. Are we going to do a second round of true community-related grants?
Well, that is for the committee to determine.
And
So
when will that happen?
I believe next month, we're going to be initiating that conversation.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah. Back end focus right now has been developing the system, project management software, and everything we need to take on 40, 50 plus projects. So that's kind of the quiet labor that's been taking place more recently. And then, like I said, it's going to go from famine to flood. So those future projects, that will be started soon, that conversation. Okay, thank you, Mr. Phillips. Next discussion item is resource needs. I'm going to share my screen with you briefly. So, as I said earlier, we have the amount of staff resources that we have. We've tried to keep things very tight, spend the money very cautiously and conservatively. With that also does come a little extension of timelines that we may have expected upfront. So with that being said, in relation to the department requests, we do have some additional resource needs. So, and there we go. We have over 30 project risk assessments backlogged currently. The estimated completion date from Ernst & Young, and this is assuming all goes well. We don't have any bottlenecks in getting information, March 10th, 2023, which means some projects will have completed the process and even be at the resolution stage but many will not until March 10th. Proposed resource addition, 2 staff members and 2 senior managers. And it shows their rate there with a total of $80,000. I know it's a large price tag, but adding these resources, these 4 staff members will decrease the completion time for the risk assessment process by a month, potentially more, but that was the most conservative date that they gave us. So by the next county board, we could potentially be complete and finished in this risk assessment process, meaning all of those projects are ready to go to resolution to get started in the execution phase. But this comes at no additional cost to the county, because whether we add resources now or not, this work has to be completed. We've initiated these projects. We have to go through the risk assessment process. So it's really a matter of, do we spend the money a more extended period of time and wait longer to get these projects started, or do we add resources and get it done quickly? So I wanted to come to you today to ask you for a consensus to add these staff resources to our EY team so that we can increase the completion date expectation from March 10th to February 14th. Is there any objection to that at this point?
Mr. Chairman Bates, please.
Ms. Bates?
I think this is a good idea. There's no need to spread this out. We can do it quickly and efficiently by pulling it together. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. And again, because we have been very cautious and judicious in our spending, we didn't want there to be a sudden increase in the monthly invoice coming from Ernst & Young, and then everyone here wonders what happened. I don't want to add staff to our team unless I get the approval from all of you, and I'm happy to do so. I'm happy to add whatever we need to just get things moving, but Ernst & Young said this would be an ideal addition to our team. Mr. Roth?
I had some questions. You said no additional costs, so ARPA funds would cover it? That's what you're.
Yes, all of the administrative expenses for our program come from the fund itself.
Okay. And then do those resources go away after February 14th, or they'll stay through the end of the ARPA?
They will go away.
Okay. And then the question had come up, additional projects down the road, will we need them again?
And that is something that, if you guys say right now that it's okay that we staff our project resource needs adequately to keep things moving at a very fast pace, then we'll do that.
And would it be more efficient to just keep them consistently, or bring them onto and then let them go and bring them back on?
I think because this is really just a big step in the department request process that Ernst & Young takes on. They're going to come on for this portion. If we determine that, yeah, it would be better and more efficient use of our money to keep them on afterwards, then that's the conversation we'll have with Ernst &
But the
Young.
question, could we bring them on, take them off, they come back in July?
Absolutely.
Now, sometimes when you do that, you have a learning curve every time you do that. Are we at risk for that, or is that because it's EY?
So
There's not really a learning curve.
With this portion of the process, it's really compliance vetting. So they're specialties that, and these folks are working in other ARPA.
So they're
projects.
trained in that, and then so
Yeah.
we're not really paying for a learning curve.
Yeah, and you see the staff rates there. The staff rate $179 an hour, that is the majority of the work being done by those employees, but they require someone to sign off on their work at the end of it.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it's typical consultant fees, right?
Right. Mr. Sturgis.
Thank you.
I know I'm new to the committee, but 24 days for $80,000. I mean, unless somebody is saying that there's an absolute rush deadline that we're going to miss, I don't. I don't see the urgency for $80,000. That's just.
Mr. Chairman?
Well, I hold on to address that. I think either way, we're going to be spending that money, but the urgency really is that we started this whole process with department requests last April or May, I believe. So we've been waiting a long time to get to this point. We still have a whole bunch of things to consider about how to use the rest of the ARPA money. And that is going to consume a lot of our decision-making time.
Are you suggesting the $80,000 to expedite this by 24 days? We're still going to spend that same amount of money if we draw it out?
Mm-hmm. It just takes longer to get these projects going. And some of them have a significant lead time. So the longer we wait to get them started, the more risk is involved in potentially not fulfilling the obligation. Mr. Roth.
What's the downside risk? I mean, at some point, the ARPA project, the money goes away, right? And then if we don't use it, we lose it.
Correct. And our goal. is
And
to
what's the
use it.
deadline for that?
We have to have all expenditures allocated by the end of 24.
Okay.
And all project work and services have to be completed by the end of 26.
And we know that dollar amount, right? So it's already been given to us
Yeah,
or
it was the
budgeted.
103,413,and41.
What percent have we spent so far?
Off the top of my head, to date, I do not know.
I
but
mean,
we-
just
we
rough
can-
number,
yeah,
20 or 50 or?
I think we've spent about 30 actually, and we have a bunch more allocated, such as earmarked, such as these projects.
So we put an aggressive deadline for us to spend it before the deadline. So if we have slippage, we're covered.
Yeah, we want to have some buffers in our timeline
Right.
because you have to.
That's what happens with projects, sir.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Mr.
Chair,
Tepe?
Tepe here.
Sure.
I may be
And I'll come to you
jumping,
guys.
I may be jumping ahead, but I think they're interrelated. But we have a resolution, and in that resolution, it shows that build to date by Ernst and Young is so far is roughly $781,000,
Mhm.
which by my calculation amounts to over 3,000 hours of work. Okay? And we're now saying that by just this 80,000, they're going, is this 80,000 to make these things done by March 10th?
By
Or they're
February-
going to be done by March 10th and that they can then have it done by February 14th?
The additional resources at 80,000 would bring us to completing the risk assessment process by February 14th, rather
Mr.
than
Chairman?
March 10th.
And
Yes,
as you know, I've always been a bit concerned about the amount of hours that have gone into all of this. And I won't, other than repeating my concern about that, I'll just be quiet for a while.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, I'm sorry,
Bates,
Mr.
please.
Caius and then Madam Chair, and then Bates. Mr. Caius, go ahead.
is me? Oh, it seems to me that when you say the proposed resource addition is more likely or more correctly stated as a proposed resource compression. We're not actually adding anything. We are compressing the hours that would have been spent anyway into a shorter period of time so that we'd be able to address this thing and have it wrapped up at an earlier date. Is that not correct?
Yeah,
Yep.
we're compressing the timeline by adding resources.
Well, it's not really in it. You have those resources. So you're going to see the bill earlier, but it's going to be the same bill whether you spread it over a month or 6 months, right?
Yes, it's just currently it would be performed by the core team that we have now. This adds to that core team so that they can compress the timeline and get it done.
Okay, you keep wanting to put add in there, but I don't see the addition. I see the compression. So it's the same man hours. It's just put in a shorter period of time.
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right.
Madam Chair?
February 14th is the date of our next board meeting. Are you going to have resolutions ready and available at that time?
No. At the next ARPA in February, we'll have some project resolutions coming to you then. Mhm. Mr. Phillips, you had something to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to speak to the February date for the risk assessment. That is a standard. There are unknowns, there are projects, several, maybe many, that are going to go well beyond that date. Because
Yeah,
during the risk assessment process is a discovery process.
Repeat that sentence, please.
The risk assessment process is a discovery, analysis, and determination process.
Okay,
And during that process, we are collecting data. We are going out to, in Mr. Van Kerkhoff's case, to third parties that are going to be partnering with us. They have work to do. They have work to respond to our departments. They have to analyze. They come to us. We So it is in fact a process. So
And this is just the best estimate, February 14th. Some may take a little longer. So that's just the nature of project work. Ms. Bates, did you have a question?
Yes, it's a comment that I believe what this shows is that we have an advantage here because Ernst & Young is flexible and they're dynamic. It's the dynamic nature of hiring a consultant. They can put a couple more people on here for a month or so and get the job done for us faster. But like Mr. Kaya said, we are compressing. We are putting the peanut butter on thicker in one spot instead of spreading the peanut butter out like that. But we're using the same
Yes.
amount of peanut butter.
Yes, we're trying to get to the jelly, so we're putting the peanut butter on thicker.
Yes.
Mr. Leonard, do you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just at first blush here, I really can't reconcile the fact that we're spending an additional 80,000 now. I understand your statement about the fact we're going to have to spend it sooner or later. But I think also too, when we first hired Ernst & Young, I thought we had allocated a certain amount as a maximum to be spent. I forget if it was 1 million and if we're at 780,000 now, another 80,000 here, that tells me that we're going to be having to increase our allocation
And I'm
down
about
the
to
road.
bring that up momentarily, so I'll get to that. Is there any more questions or comments on this portion?
Yeah, Mr.
Gums?
Gums.
Mr. Gums, go ahead.
Mr. Gums here. Just a quick question with the 4 additional team members. There's no learning curve for them. They can simply walk in, immediately know how to handle that risk assessment process. I would hate to use 4 days of training. Do you understand that question?
Yes. Yeah, they will integrate immediately into the process.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, to that point, we are getting close to the original maximum for our contract with Ernst & Young. We selected $1 million as a good estimate of how much we might need, certainly in the first year. We're under that. We've surpassed a year on the calendar and haven't even reached that $1 million mark. But we did ask Ernst & Young to provide us with a projection based upon our actual experience now, how much things cost, how long things may take, an estimate of what may be needed for the continued life of the program. So next month, we will have a resolution to you that will ask for that. I don't know what that amount may be, but I can tell you that the national average from what our Ernst & Young team is seeing is about 4 to 5% administrative costs for ARPA projects nationally. And we are under 1%. Even as we hit the $1 million mark, we're still under 1%, which is really good. Some would say 7 to 10% is a good administrative cost level, but again, nationally 4 or 5%. I think we're going to come in well under that. I'm not going to give my predictions, but that will be coming up next month. So I know that's a question that's on everyone's mind. You see the invoice chart documenting how much we've spent and how much is left. This additional resource will get us there a little more quickly. But we do have enough time still to have that conversation next month. Mr. Roth?
Is the thinking the additional amount being asked for is for the spend in 2023 or through the end of 2024?
The initial amount that we've already approved?
No, that you're going to come back and ask for additional. Are you going to do it year by year?
I don't know exactly because we're not that far yet into the resolution. I would imagine that it's going to be a projection to the end of the program, but it may be just for the next year or so.
Okay, thank you.
And as we've discussed this whole time upfront, the administrative costs are going to be much higher. You have a lot more legwork to do, establishing processes as the projects start to wind down in 24, 25. Our need for consultant resources will be greatly reduced, dramatically reduced, and probably come down to just the level of assisting with reporting as we have executed everything else.
I do have another question.
Go ahead.
Is this resource assessment required by the federal government, or is it a choice we made as a county to do it?
It's a choice we made as a county. I knew we were coming close to the maximum amount, and I asked that Ernst & Young start projecting ahead for us.
Okay, thank you.
did you?
I meant more the reason we're doing the risk assessment,
Risk assessment, not the.
not the,
Oh, the risk assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah, the risk assessment is there's not a standard form, but you have to complete risk assessments per the treasury guidance and the
okay.
federal.
And so it
reporting.
is a federal requirement.
And
That was,
even if they didn't require it, we would want to do that.
yeah, I understand. I'm just
Absolutely.
curious. Thank you.
Especially, I know Michelle Neerman's ears are ringing somewhere like, gotta do it, compliance, So, any questions on that? Again, it's nothing to present. It's just letting you know that's coming next month and we'll have that conversation then. If there's nothing else, we will go on to new business. We have a resolution approving invoices from Ernst & Young LLP for professional services rendered for Kane County Art Program from 8/1/22 to 11/30/22. I need a motion and a second to approve.
Bates moves.
Bates moves.
Kenyon second.
Kenyon seconds. Any questions or comments on this resolution?
Do we have the numbers?
It's in the agenda. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Resolution.
Or yeah, it's in the agenda packet. Mr. Leonard?
Yeah, I just had one question. I noticed that August was much, much higher than the other months.
Mhm.
Why was that?
Is it in the agenda packet? I'm sorry, I don't know offhand, Mr. Phillips. With each invoice comes a narrative that describes the work that took place for the month. So I believe in the agenda packet, you will find that narrative. If it's not there,
It
we'll
was
make.
broken down per month, but I
Yeah.
didn't see the, I think August was like 221,000 or something. Seemed much higher than the other 3 months that were included.
Yeah, I don't recall what the narrative states off the top of my head, but it does support that. I will include that.
Yeah,
with
we'll
the
make sure
link.
we include the
Yeah.
narratives going forward and we'll send those out if they weren't already sent out so that you
Be
can see
great.
that. Yeah, every month you should be able to see the invoices and what they did. So.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mr.
any other
Chair,
questions or
Chair, I
comments?
have
Mr.
some
Tepe.
Can we go to the next page? Thank you. There are 4 lines of services up there. 94,000, 51, 41, and 16,000. Are those the invoices we're asking to be approved?
Yes, those are the invoice amounts.
Okay, and then there is a budget adjustment of $209,000. What is that budget adjustment for?
I am not our accountant, but I imagine it is because they have to move the money from the general ARP fund to the cash on.
It's
hand
from
fund.
cash on
Yeah.
hand. into
But
the-
those four,
transactional
those
record.
4 invoices do not add up to that budget adjustment.
That, I can answer
Yeah,
that.
Ms.
Excuse me,
Phillips.
Peter Phillips. That is because we have a $54,000 invoice that is not on there that was approved for May services it was approved by the county board. And through clerical error or whatever, that those monies had not been paid to EY. So Mr. Onzik included that $54,000 in the $209,000 being moved to Fund 355 to pay the check.
Then we're still way off because those numbers equate to about 202,000, I think.
About 200,000, that's right. And then we're asking for 209.
He had,
Numbers-
And then you say it
He had cash
equates
on
to
hand.
54,000 too?
correct,
An additional 54,000?
not, not an additional because it was already approved. So the cash on hand in the line item, I believe was $174,000. And then you deduct the 54,000, it's the math. I verified the number with Mr. Onzik. He provided
All
that.
right,
I just don't know the math.
You
off
can
the
have
top of my
that
head.
summary from
Yeah.
Mr. Onzik, because as other departments, we rely on finance for those budget tables. So
Sure.
we'll get that explanation out to you.
Great.
Any other questions or comments?
No.
Okay, clerk, please call the roll.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Bates,
Bates, yes.
Gums,
Gums, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, no.
Molina, Strathman,
Strathman, yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis present.
Tepe,
Tepe, no.
and Sanchez.
Sanchez, yes. Okay, no old business, no need for executive session.
Wait, does that pass or not?
Yeah.
Can you please have the breakdown for that, for the next executive or
Yeah.
whatever? Yeah, we just need the breakdown. Nobody's,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, just make the numbers reconcile would be great.
Yeah, I think we can update the resolution in the agenda software. Is that correct, Jenny?
Oh, yes.
For executive, so they'll see that.
Mhm.
Okay, it'll be in the agenda packet for executive. Okay, I just need a motion to adjourn. Told you 12 o'clock, Cliff, and we're on 12
Move we
o'clock.
adjourn. And I think it was time well spent. Not always do I think that.
I need a second. I need a second.
Leonard second.
Leonard seconds. All those in favor say aye.